This is the introduction to Dante's Divine Comedy. Today I'll discuss the Inferno, the next session, the Purgatorio, and then the Paradiso. Before I get into some of the 34 cantos of the Inferno, I'd like to reflect a little bit about ways of reading the Divine Comedy because it's often misread. People overreact to it. The Inferno is replete with graphic and lewd and vivid images that some people read much too literally. Dante was a medieval thinker, so he understood layered ways of reading anything from literal, historical, grammatical, to types, to typology, to anagogy, to mystical, to existential. And so there's a variety of layers of reading, and it's very important when approaching the Divine Comedy that we know how to read it and not be taken out by a simplistic literalism. But a few things to note before we get to the Inferno. First of all, it's a comedy, commedia in that sense. And comedias are genres of literature, but they're also philosophies of life. A comedy in that literary philosophical sense is a way of understanding the human journey in which one and all must face into agons, struggles. They have to face the shadows within themselves, undealt with desires, appetites that perhaps can lead them askew and astray, addictions, ways of freezing their identity, which actually take them down paths that lead to their own hurt and harm. And so in a comedy, there's the journey inward, the journey of facing what must be faced to become free from what we are not. So inevitably, a comedy is always about free from something and free for something. And there's the struggle, the agon, the agony. And as one is willing and has the courage, which is one of the classical virtues, to face into those internal issues, again and again struggling with them, in time, the end, at least in principle, is going to be a good ending, a healthier person, a freer person from their particular attachments on the journey. And so the very nature of the Divine Comedy versus a tragedy is that through effort, just a tragedy and a comedy, both the person on the journey is confronted with challenges about themselves, their own inner life, as well as what's happening in the external world, politically, socially, economically, religiously, all of these things. But in a comedy, the protagonist, and of course there is always the antagonist, both internally and externally, gradually overcomes these issues, and the ending is in principle positive. This is why in the Divine Comedy, Dante goes into the Inferno, the issues he and others on that journey have to face into, and then the Purgatorio, what must be purged, just as in the Christian tradition, the three levels of transformation are the Purgatorio Illumination Union. So what Dante is doing, he's working out of that. But unless one is willing to face what must be purged, then they cannot move on. And then they set themselves up for a tragedy if a person is not willing to go there. So first of all, a comedy, and the book was initially just titled a commedia or a comedy. It was later called Divine Comedy. So sometimes the danger when people think Divine Comedy, well, it's divinely inspired, I can't critique anything Dante's written. Well, the divine element comes a little later, and inevitably when we read the Divine Comedy, we want to heed and hear what can be learned, but also ask Dante questions on the journey itself. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the Divine Comedy it's a library of Western civilization. It's a compendium of all the best that has been thought and said from Greek myth, from Greek philosophy, biblical thought, biblical metaphors, biblical images, as well as the Italy of Dante's time. So it threads together a variety of ways of knowing the journey itself, grounded in the hints, the pointers, the leads that can be offered from civilizations of the past and their ongoing message and pointers for each and all of us individually, communally, family, communities as we move into the future, so that tragedy will not be the end, and so that unnecessary hurt is not something in which people again and again revisit because they haven't dealt with the issues that lead to the problems in their journey or the addictions they may have. And so important to get a sense then, when we get to Dante, we're in fact being exposed to the richness, the mother lode, the fullness of Western civilization and its understanding of formation, its notion of spiritual direction by being exposed to the women and men who have lived that for good or for ill. And so it's an opening, it's a door into the cathedral then of Western thought and its understanding of the good life, the good, the true, the beautiful life. The third thing would be that Dante was living at a period of time of great renaissance in Europe. And part of that renaissance was the revival of Greek thought, and particularly Aristotle. And Dante drew deeply from Aristotle via Thomas Aquinas, and particularly Aristotle's the Nicomachean Ethics. And in the Nicomachean Ethics, what you get is the early books are about the virtues and the vices. And the vices are about those things, and each person has different vices they live with. And can they name those? Are they aware of what those are? Are they consciously alert to those? And if they're not, they become victims of subconscious or unconscious drivenness. And books 8 and 9 of Aristotle's Ethics are about friendship, and then book 10 is about contemplation. And so what Aristotle's doing and what Dante is doing in drawing from Aristotle as interpreted by Aquinas is offering a way of the journey into wisdom and how to live a wise life versus an unwise life, the nature of friendship, and then finally the contemplative way itself, which is what the Paradisio is about. But it's a journey to get to those places of much internal homework as well as external homework itself. So this is important that Dante's living at a time of great renewal of culture, of thought, of politics, and the Divine Comedy very, very much reflects that also. Also probably important in thinking about it, particularly the Inferno, it's set within Maundy Thursday and it ends with Easter Sunday. So when we enter into the Inferno, if read literally, the temptations to think each of these people at various levels of hell are in different cantos. That's their fixed state. They have made choices in life. They have chosen not to look into the choices they have made and the consequences. And so this is their destination. So the choices in life lead to eternal consequences, and there's no way out of that. But in fact, what Dante has done, and this is probably important to understand, because the one temptation is to say our choices in life then lead to eternal consequences, and what's being described in the Inferno is those consequences. There's no way any of those men and women can move from that state. It's perpetual inferno they're living with, and there's no exit in that sense. But when it's seen within Maundy Thursday and the harrowing of hell, by which Christ goes down into hell or into the Inferno and calls people forth and away from what they have been into possibilities who they might be, then in fact the journey to the Inferno is a part of calling forth people out of where they have been, choices they have made, in fact, into the Purgatorio and finally the Paradisio. And this is the journey of Dante and Virgil, essential. They're going through there, that particular journey, and Dante himself has had to work through a variety of issues in his life, toxins within, poisons within that he's had to face into, hurts and pains, betrayals by friends, disappointments in politics in Florence where he's had to flee, where he was marginalized, the anger, the hatred, the vindictive side within him that would want to get even with people who have mistreated him. And so many of the people he meets in the Inferno, he has to deal with his own attitudes, his own anger against being betrayed. But he moves through that with Virgil and out of the end. Then he's moving out of that in the Purgatorio as the final element of the Inferno is the river Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. So at a certain point, one has to forget those things of which we are not, so we may then become what we are meant to be, and that's what the Purgatorio is finally about. So important to see that the whole journey into the Inferno is really a part of each person having to face those elements in their lives. Often they don't want to, which can become addictive, can be unhealthy drivenness, looking where they lead. And of course, Dante is graphic in his images of how he describes them. And so we can say, do I want to be someone upside down? Do I want wasps and bees to be chasing me? Do I want to be like a swallow tossed about by the winds of time? Is that all I am? Or is there more to me? Is there any center, or is there any core at all? And so the fact that it's set within Maundy Thursday and then Easter Sunday, we can see that what Dante is doing is that everyone is on this journey. The harrowing of hell of Christ welcomes anyone out of that, but they have to face into what their issues are, be free from it, and the Purgatorio is a part of that journey in which they have to leave behind. That's the Reverb Letha, forgetting it, moving on to who we are meant to be. So Dante is not fixing people in decisions, and one is there forever, as certain forms of theology have it. You didn't accept Christ in this life. Decisions you made in life, you're going to be burning eternally in the Inferno, and there's no way out of it. That's not what Dante is. That's not what Dante's out. He's in fact pointing out the nature of the journey one and all have to go to, and the way out of that, by facing in the Inferno each person's distinctive issues, purging them, and then moving on. And that's what that's the time frame that in that sense of which the Inferno is about. It's actually the journey to freedom. So then the harrowing of hell, and then, as I said, the raw and graphic images. You get people who are literalists to just look at it. Is there something wrong with Dante? Why would someone describe these things in such detail, graphically? And is that really what God is about, who punishes, who's a tyrant, and this is the way he treats people, and this is their destination? And what Dante is doing, he says, here, look at this image. This is who you are at a deeper level. Did you like that? No, let's then work through that in terms of your own freedom. And so the literal images are really just pointers to what a person might be. Do they want to be like that? No, then move out of that. They never should be read literally, but for literalists, it's a sign that this is what medieval philosophy formation was about, these crude images in which people are reduced almost to animals and beasts and other things. And so Dante is a medievalist. He understood medieval exegesis. He was a part of that world. So this is a way of reading the Inferno that should never be read in a simplistic, literal way. These metaphors are meant to open up a person to alternate ways of seeing oneself. And if this metaphor depicts the consequences of choices, then a person begin to say, well, perhaps I should be making other choices with my life if it leads me to being this type of person, either isolated from others or backbiting others or anger or bitter, and what that can look like. Some people are upside down. It's because their whole worldview is upside down. Why is Satan at the lowest level? He's frozen. Well, ice, of course, is a person that's not productive. There's no greening in their life. There's no productivity in their life. They're a frozen person. The sap is not flowing in their soul. So, of course, he's not talking about Satan as frozen. As a person, it's a metaphor of how a person can be frozen and produce no life, no greenery, no spring, no summer, no fruits in their life. And so these are just metaphors. If a person can look at my own life, am I just freezing inside and there's no life whatsoever? Well, then a person is becoming more and more into a darker place in which the spring, the summer is gone. This is what happens to a person who becomes bitter, who becomes angry, they start freezing, and their life shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and they become like really ice. And the mobility or the freedom to become something else, they become victims of choices, and they become frozen, and can't navigate anymore. And what Dante is doing, he's pointing out, this is where certain choices lead at the lowest level. Do you want to be a frozen person? No, then reflect on choices. So the Inferno, then, those are just a few little, sort of a porch into the Inferno itself, a few things to think about. So the Inferno works well, there's 34 cantos, there's 33 in the Purgatorio, 33 in the Paradiso. It gives 100 cantos. But the Inferno, as I mentioned earlier, Dante himself, really the story, the drama begins with he's in midlife. He's at a point in midlife which he, in all intents, has made problematic decisions. He's having to live with the consequences of his decisions, as often happens at midlife for some people. They've naively in their late teens and 20s are unaware of consequences of decisions, and then they hit a midlife crisis. And this is what essentially he's done. And he enters a dark forest. He doesn't know how to orient. He doesn't know how to navigate at all. It's a point of ambiguity, confusion. And so he, at this point of the journey, and in that sense, most people could relate to what Dante is trying to make sense of, is that we at times make decisions in our lives which are problematic. It takes us to places in which we enter a dark forest. The trees surround us. We don't know how to navigate in any way properly. And so what do we do at this point? Are we fated to live within a dark forest and find no way out whatsoever? Eventually, Virgil meets him, sent by Mary to Beatrice or Beatrice and Lucia. So you have these, he's almost lost any sense of understanding Dante, grace, God's goodness and openness to that. So he needs a mediator, someone physically present who actually can be with him and assist him in coming to grips with his choices and to some degree the tragedy of his life up to that point in his journey. So he needs a friend, someone who he can trust. And so the women, these Mary, Beatrice, who he had written about earlier, of course, and Lucia, who's, interestingly enough, she's the patron saint of the blind. And Dante had become blind at this point in his life. He did not see properly himself, his world, and he needs someone. And so Virgil, and here you have within the richness of the Christian tradition, they believed in general revelation, common grace, and the wisdom of a classical civilization. And Virgil was the great writer of Italy, the Aeneid, the founding of Rome, and Dante deeply admired this poet laureate of Italy. But he was also a friend and a teacher, and this is very important to understand in what Dante is doing. Who is one's spiritual director? Who's one's spiritual friend? Who is one that can be trusted as a person who goes into the dark, the painful, the difficult places in life, down deeper, deeper, deeper into the dark nights of the soul, the clouds of unknowing, those places where a person is totally confused in their journey. They don't know how to orient. They're paralyzed in making decisions. They need someone by their side who is trusted, who is respected, and this is what Virgil becomes for Dante. Because he's very much at a point in his life he doesn't know how to navigate. He's out of touch with any sense of who he is, and he needs a wise guide, and Virgil becomes that wise guide. The temptation in the midst of when a person's in a dark place, the longing is to get to light quick, and so Dante looks up and he sees almost in a utopian manner, oh, if I can just make it to the Purgatorio and the Paradiso, but he's blocked right away by three images, which Eliot will pick up in Ash Wednesday, the leopard, the lion, and the she-wolf. And what Dante's saying is everyone has to face their inner struggles. There is no magic silver bullet snake oil by which one can go from longing to be free and the actual being of free. It itself is a journey. And the Inferno is about that journey of which Dante and others who are in various levels of Inferno have to go on that journey, acknowledge their temperamental tendencies which have brought them to places of hurt and harm, and then work on those. The hope is always they have a Virgil in that process, in that journey. Interestingly enough, the vestibule, as you're moving down into the Inferno, is the people there who wanted to be open to everything, but they believed in nothing. And so they were blown about by bees, chasing them all around, and they were almost a sort of a trendy liberal who wants to be open to everything, but they're committed to nothing. So they don't want to make choices substantively on anything, which is itself its own choice. And so Dante puts these particular people, and it's a perennial class of people who are paralyzed in making any decisions. They want to appear open-minded, but their open-mindedness, in fact, is a way of not being committed to anything in life. And in not making choices about anything substantive, they make choices about being trivial as people and committed to nothing at all. And this is a perennial tendency of a certain temperament. And Dante has them in the vestibule before you begin to enter limbo, where people within the history of Christianity, it's the great classical, many of the great classical thinkers, the unbaptized, many of these were people of nobility. They were people who thought wisely. They were interested in the contemplative elements of life. They were interested in justice and peacemaking. They wrote insightfully about it. They were citizens who cared about their world, but it was before Christ has come. So what do you do with that within a certain type of theology? Well, Dante, being a medieval thinker, would say these are people of integrity, of authenticity, and hence Virgil leads Dante on this particular journey into the difficult places in his life, because Virgil himself had walked that journey. Anyone who reads the Aeneid, for example, and some of the other great classical writers, you recognize these great writers understood the vices, they understood the virtues, they understood when you made choices for one or the other and the consequences and the implications of doing that. And so the area of limbo is all just awaiting the next step of the purgatorial on the journey. The next level is lust, at one level animal, almost like lust. So what Dante's looking at is sensuality and sexuality and betrayal of relationships. So the lust of the physical element, but there's also other lusts he's going to explore as he goes deeper. It can be the lust of, and this is where you get Pluto, the lust of possessions, the lust of wealth, the lust to be important, the lust for power. And so there's deeper understandings of lust, which will be explored. So soul lust, not only physical lust, spiritual lust. And as it goes deeper into the level, then you get popes and clerics who use religion and use religious language to indulge their own appetites. So Dante, in many ways, is as critical of elements of the Roman Catholic Church as was Luther and Erasmus a couple of centuries later, and he skewers them in a very poignant manner because they use religion to serve egoistic or narcissistic ends, and some of them link themselves with politics in a way that religion itself then becomes a plaything of power politics in that sense. So lust can work at a variety of levels that he's working on. As it goes down further levels, he's looking at various forms of philosophy in which they have to be critiqued. And it's not because he's necessarily trying to unnecessarily demonize certain ways of doing philosophy. What his concern about, there's certain philosophical traditions which are reductionistic, and they shrink a bigger Catholic vision of what it means to be human and wisdom and contemplation. And as a philosopher and theologian, as Dante was, very much impacted by Thomas Aquinas's works in the Summa, his concern is that what is a form of philosophy that is about wisdom, about contemplation, about insight, about political responsibility, that is about justice and caring for city-states, in his case, Florence, where there was cancel culture very, very much at that place. So as a public citizen, Dante was very concerned about how politics can be used to serve power and narcissistic ends, just as religion can, and popes can, and cardinals can, and priests can. So where do they belong? Just because they hold important clerical positions, does that mean they have a free pass to the Paradiso? Not so. because for Dante, the test of integrity is the test of character. And if a person doesn't pass the test of character, then they're not automatically, as I said, given a free pass. They've got to go through the Inferno, face their issues, whether a person's lay, cleric, cardinal, pope, whatever, until they're willing to face their misuse of a good to serve their own ends. Then there's consequences, the consequences they have to face on their journey. In a lot of the Inferno, there's three levels always at work: the world of thought, or the inner life. So people are inevitably going to experience unexpected, painful betrayals, difficult situations in life where they thought they could have trusted someone. In fact, they're betrayed. And so then does a person at that point increasingly become angry, vindictive? And you can see a lot of the lower levels of the cantos where vindictiveness works itself out, the implications, how it breaks relationships, where people in families betray one another, where people in politics betray one another. What's that in terms of destroying the social bond? Because family and communities, because to be human for Dante is to be involved in community, is to be part of a larger social organism. And what happens when people in those organisms betray one another? They take advantage of one another. When trusting people are betrayed, what do they do with that if they can't find forgiveness? Of course, forgiveness is a part of the Purgatorio we'll get to when they move beyond Letha and move into the Purgatory, and they meet Cato a little later on and what has to be purged there. So these deeper levels, further and further, what's going on is Dante's looking at the abuse of thought, how we're not careful. Our inner life, the thieves of the soul can creep in, and if we're not careful, we entertain thoughts that begin to shrink us as human beings. And then words, how language can be abused. Again and again, Dante returns to how language is abused, misused to manipulate people to think certain things which are to their own hurt and harm. So words are very important, and words which are meant to be something in which you trade in the commerce of language that means something can be twisted and distorted to serve power interests, and then actions themselves. How people, when they move from thought to word to deeds, both in religion and politics and education and many others, how these very important elements of the good life can be twisted, can be distorted, and inevitably it breaks down human community, it breaks down human relationships, it breaks down human families, when people can no more be trusted with their word. But inevitably it starts in the world of thought, or the world of feelings, or the inner life. And if those inner thoughts are not checked, then they inevitably lead to certain words, and then they lead to deeds. And so thought, words, and deeds. And Dante is unpacking again and again how those three elements of the human soul, when he says thought, he's not using just intellectual ideas. He's talking about images that can come into the mind, fantasies, imagination out of control. Where does that go if unchecked? A person becomes a victim of internal fantasies, and then these eventually come out in words and then deeds. Some people, of course, just live only in the world of thought, but that has its own level in the Inferno, because they're in their own internal inferno, constantly knowing what they could be, but taken captive by a whole range of addictive images and fantasies that have totally imprisoned them in a gilded cage in that sense. And so Dante's a master psychologist of the inner life, as well as it is of how this plays itself out in words and then deeds. And so the Inferno is really a story of Dante's own journey, and certain people he meets in the Inferno are his own temptation, which he has been taken in by, which has brought him in his midlife to places where he is. He's sympathetic to those, but sympathetic in an unhealthy sense, because we can be sympathetic to areas which we should not be sympathetic to, because they lead to the shrinkage of the soul. But often we're overly sympathetic to our own temptations and the consequences of them. Others that may not be one's own temperamental issues, then we can just walk by them and other people would be more sensitive to them because that's the area of their shadow, their dark, their misdirected appetites and desires and longings and addictions. And so it's always interesting in the Inferno, as in the Purgatorio, to see where Dante is reacting strongly to someone and where he can just pass by someone. It says something a lot about Dante in this autobiographical journey of the Inferno. So as we meet then for class, what we'll be looking at is journeying with Dante through the Inferno and asking ourselves, via the Aristotelian Thomist approach, what are the various vices that Dante is naming? What are some of the crude? What are some of the subtle? And when we indulge those appetites, what are the consequences of doing so? And then what happens to people who don't want to acknowledge, in fact, these vices, but justify their vices and justify their narcissism and justify understandings of their identity, rather than saying, in fact, my understanding of my identity and indulging it is what's creating the problems for myself. And then because of that, in other relationships, because we live in communities, we interact with people, and our understanding of ourselves is going to have an impact on other people. And so much of the Inferno, as the Purgatorio and the Paradiso, is a study of identity. Who is the self? What is the self? How do we understand ourselves? And if we have a misunderstanding of the self, it's going to have serious consequences for ourselves, as well as friendships, relationships, families, community, and politics, public world itself. So the Divine Comedy is not only a work of inner journey, interpersonal journey, communal journey, public journey, a political journey, and if things go wrong at that point, they're going to have serious consequences for all these other spheres, these spheres of life itself. And that's what we'll be looking at in our first class in the Divine Comedy, the significance of the Inferno and each person having to face those particular issues in themselves, in their understanding of identity, and then if not faced with, these are the consequences they have to live with. And if they want to move on, then they have to begin the process of overcoming it, and that's the nature of a comedy.